The Orrium Mystery. First, before I begin, I want to remind you that I've warned you about getting interested in history. By now, this stuff is ancient, as useful as a bedtime story about the old kingdoms. Beyond that, it's dangerous. You can end up following this knowledge off of a cliff. However, we did make an arrangement, so I will devote myself to answering your questions. Understand that when you ask me what the Orrium Mystery is, you're asking about a subject that would take many, many books to properly explain. You will have questions about the motivations of the deities and the greater powers. I can't answer those. What I can tell you about are the actions of the mortals and the incarnates. You can take what you wish from that. Since you've asked about the Orrium, I won't start there. You know something of it, and that will be enough for now. First, I have to explain something else to you. The SYMPATIC. In the Orrium Mystery, the Orrium itself plays just a small role. You know that the mystery led to the collapse of some ancient sitting room of ancient mages. I'm telling you now that the SYMPATIC was much more than that. The SYMPATIC was magic. For thousands of years, it was the destination and the foundation of magical discovery throughout the plains. It wasn't a guild or a company, as you might think. It was nothing less than its own social order, attainable only through magical talent. Not only humans, elves, and other mortals were members, but even angels, demons, genies, and so on. The mages of the SYMPATIC were all of equal standing. Though a dragon might rule over kobolds in their own world, in the SYMPATIC, one could not order another. This allowed a free flow of ideas which made the mages of the SYMPATIC era completely superior to any mages of the current age, including myself and my masters. To become a member of the SYMPATIC, one had to demonstrate an exceptional work of magic. This was known as a gift work, as it was presented as a gift to the SYMPATIC's expansive body of knowledge. If the gift work was accepted by 15 sitting members, the applicant would become a full member in their own right. Usually, this elevation would be announced before a forum of other members. Now, you may be thinking that this is a remarkably informal process. This is true, but it's also the most formal ceremony that the SYMPATIC ever put on. Members of the SYMPATIC were called Archons, a title that has continued among some mages even until today. There was never any ruling body or system of ranking established in the SYMPATIC. There was no voting either, except in accepting of a gift work. As a whole, the SYMPATIC never made any decisions or even suggestions. No Archon was ever removed from the SYMPATIC for the simple reason that there was never a method of removing them. I am stressing this now so that you understand. Each Archon was an independent. The SYMPATIC only served as a means for these great mages to meet and converse. There was, however, a very seriously considered set of manners which organized life and discussion in the SYMPATIC. These were informal but had been dug deep by time. Archons naturally organized themselves by their interests and ended up with two kinds of groupings, forums and leagues. Forums were the keystone of the SYMPATIC, open discussion groups for the furtherance of magical study. Though informal, groups of mages with the same interests would meet in the same hall of the Sympaticon from session to session, the Sympaticon being the massive complex which was the seat of the SYMPATIC. The forums took their names from these halls. In the SYMPATIC's last days, 3 forums were considered more prestigious than the others. The Bwenley Forum, which met in the Bwenley Hall and discussed planar and time magic, the Tlacliausnus Forum, which discussed inert matter and alchemy, and the Amdi Oa Forum, which discussed life, death, and incarnation. In a society without rank, being known as a friend of one of these forums became an important mark of distinction. You know that I am a friend of Scholomance, but perhaps you never wondered what it meant. Without giving you the whole history of this institution, yes, the two usages are related. Being a friend of a forum in the SYMPATIC, though, meant having the privilege to speak before the forum without invitation. It also gave one the right to invite non-friends to speak. Each forum had its own procedures for accepting new friends, but all required an agreement between the current body of forum friends and a particular one of those friends, who is usually known as the Forum Ancient. Being an ancient was a special dignity, but, as I said before, it was not a rank or an accomplishment. The oldest friend of a forum, that is, oldest in age, not years spent as an archon, was given the duty of ancient. Their role was to maintain the forum's customs, especially their focus on the forum's accepted discussion topics. But don't think of the ancients as rulers, leaders, or judges. They were simply friends who had an assigned role, like friends were just archons who were close to a forum. Because the ancients were decided by age, incarnates overwhelmingly served in that role. This has always been a source of tension, but it never seemed to get out of hand. Leagues, as opposed to forums, were groups formed not for discussion, but to pursue particular causes. These groups were quite varied in purpose and in naming. Some are called orders, some societies, and so on. Even then, though, the name league was used as a catch-all term. Beyond this, it is impossible to say anything that would apply to all or even most leagues. Some of them were entirely made up of archons with no other affiliations, like the Calendrist League. Others were associated with outside groups, such as the archons associated with the Soul Traders. Very likely you know little of the Soul Trade now, but it was a disgrace to the living and a boon to necromancers. Regardless of purpose, gatherings under the auspices of the SYMPATIC were not to be places of combat. That meant that even though leagues might have directly crossed purposes, they would never disrupt a forum with their contests. Despite all this commitment to neutrality, there were political positions within the SYMPATIC, and it's these politics which were utterly broken by the Orrium Mystery. As with everything else, these positions were informal groupings, not even rising to the unity of a league. These positions, or alignments, sprang out of debates and coalesced around particular agitators known as speakers. Within the SYMPATIC, there was a constant low-level competition among several major priorities to claim the highest importance. Those who succeeded had their issues discussed in every forum and accepted the free support of others. Each period in the SYMPATIC history was defined by several influential figures, each of whom had their alignments behind them, each of whom jockeyed for the title of urgency. Eventually, these cheering sections would harden into antagonistic camps. Naturally, you know why that hardening took place: the breaking of the Great Wheel. I will come to that. First, it's important to tell you how things stood on the eve of that disaster. There were 6 alignments of note at the time of the breaking. Maybe most prominent were the Oceanists, gathered around the forceful angel Ocean Valentinon. The Oceanists believed that there could be no final victory of the light over the 2 warring hosts of infernals. Instead, they sought to preserve the multiverse by ensuring that the Zlizdans would not overcome the demons and vice versa. This put Ocean at odds with many other angels, and even her progenitor, the King in Gold, but her conviction was born out of centuries of war, and she was determined to convince the heavens of her correctness. The other alignments of note were the adherents of Junwang the Manifold, who sought to understand the elusive primordial beings known as the Klipoth, the adherents of Queen Empress Ursula of the Athlitlan court, who opposed the Soul Trade, the adherents of Kalamat Dret Gurnag, who felt that the protection of the mortal plane was of overriding importance, the associates of Dlurmchtam the Broad, who sought to explore and map the borders of the astral void, and the adherents of Tenovesh Newtaste, who sought to know the nature of the deities. Now that I have laid out, in brief, how things were before the breaking, let me tell you what the breaking did to the SYMPATIC. Among the friends of SCHOLOMANCE and other cosmopolites, this is common knowledge, but you mortal youths may have forgotten it. You will be familiar, I think, with monstrous storms and city-eating earthquakes. Perhaps you even witnessed a tear in reality. In my mortal home, we blame this on the world's ruin, but that ruin was itself caused by the breaking of the Great Wheel. To tell you everything there is to tell about the breaking would be the work of 3 lifetimes. I won't attempt that work, at least not on your behalf. What I will tell you now will be enough for you to understand the larger picture. At the center of reality and all real things is the Great Wheel. The wheel's turning is also what promotes the stability of magic. The exact nature or even presence of the Great Wheel is imperceptible to all. It can only be known indirectly, through subtle universal harmonies that can only be felt by the most sensitive archons. As they say, the wheel may not be a wheel. It may not even exist, although it almost certainly does. I just want to impress on you that the most we can do is to speculate about what the wheel is, and even the idea of it as a wheel is an abstraction. It is said that the wheel had two ports, the Agwu Ori, or sometimes called Shin and Shem. All we have ever really been certain of is that the wheel had more than one part. That's the only reason that we say it had two, actually, just because we know that it's at least more than one. Whatever the true number, all of its parts were needed for the wheel to continue to rotate and stabilize the multiverse. We know this because the wheel failed when just one of its parts did. We don't even know which of the parts, the Ori or the Agwu, has fallen. All we know is that the wheel no longer turns. This was the breaking of the Great Wheel. Occult investigators, both then and now, have believed that an accidental experiment caused the breaking, not a direct attack, but the culprit has never been identified. In the first days of confusion, this unknown culprit was called the White Hand. In the centuries which have come since, we began to call this being the Archfool. A natural question is why the deities did not either prevent the breaking or repair the damage. I do not mean to be condescending, especially as I know you are faithful, but your idea of the deities is likely to be very different than what the deities are actually like. To tell you all of how would require its own essay. Instead, I will keep myself to the main question, and to answer it further I must dispel some common ideas about arcane magic and divine magic. To say it bluntly, there is no such thing as divine magic. No cosmopolite would recognize what a priest can achieve as magic. Arcanism, what we might call true magic, is the use of arcane senses to manipulate the essence of magic. Some do this by intuition, while others use spells as instructions to their subtle senses. So-called divine magic is actually the calling of miracles, fully formed acts of divine will which are granted to the so-called mage by a deific power. As a student of magic, I trust you to understand the difference. Following from this, a deity cannot do anything which that deity cannot conceive of. The occult name for this is ideate construction, in case the phrase is lost among you. The conceptive agglomeration of the deities, that is, the totality of ideas available to them, is all-encompassing, but is defined by that which already exists in reality. Because the essentially duplicative miracles are thus limited, we can assume two things. The inaction of deities in regards to the breaking is due to inability, and this inability must come from the action's absence from their conceptive agglomeration. I cannot tell you with certainty why arcane magic can do what the miracles of deities cannot. The question, if you'll believe it, is not settled. I can give you two theories, however. The essentialist theory of arcane extensibility says that because arcanists manipulate magical energy itself, they can directly perform external experiments, allowing magic to achieve effects that the experimenter did not completely intend. The mortalist theory holds that while a deity's conceptive agglomeration is universal but defined, a mortal's is personal but unbounded, which is to say that a deity must either know or not know, but a mortal can guess and speculate, thus being able to reach heights unseen. Let us say, for the sake of explaining the difference, that both myself and the deity have the same powers of sight and the same information. We both want to climb a cave wall. At the bottom of the wall there is a fire to give us light. Myself and the deity both begin to climb, up and up and up, and of course as we go up the light fades and things become darker. Eventually we come to a point where we cannot see above us anymore. Because the deity must either know or not know and they cannot see ahead, they must assume that there is nothing further. However, I, though perhaps less strong a climber than the deity, can reason that because I am climbing a wall which has not stopped, it is likely that the wall does continue and that I can keep climbing, and so I would. I hope you've understood my point here. The deities cannot affect the Great Wheel because they cannot conceive of something which, to mortals, is accepted but still speculative. It's even possible that the wheel, by its very nature, lies outside the knowledge of the deities. It is likely that we will never know these answers. So that was the breaking, the impairment of the centerpiece of reality. With the wheel's motion stopped, all things stable and solid also began to fail. Rifts opened up on every plane, connecting to random spaces in the multiverse. Magic could no longer be relied upon. Great wards exploded, glamours shattered, cities vanished into nothing. The worlds of the mortal plane became deluged with violent and unpredictable weather, as well as a scourge of spontaneous undeath. One of these rifts opened up on the Rainbow Road, which is one of the astral structures that connect the planes, and from that rift raged ravenous hordes from the infinite horror of KALLA. These demon hordes had no true leader, but 3 demon princes were known in their number: Aligar, Prince of Punishment; Humban, Lord of Gluttony; and Keshkigal, the Grand Eviscerator. Immediately, they were met by a host from the upper planes, led in the van by the 4 holy wardens of Aru, and including angels, asuras, sphinxes, fae, and other powerful incarnates. This conflict is known as the War on the Rainbow Road. It is impossible to record true time when speaking of astral events, but what I can say is that this war ended with the champions of the heavens victorious, banishing the demons back to their home plane and sealing the rift. More rifts in more places would open, but there hasn't been a war on this scale since its ending. Still, the new menace posed by infernals swarming through rifts became a key concern of the SYMPATIC. The alignments within the SYMPATIC rapidly shifted to focus on the new existential questions posed by the breaking. 3 competing parties dominated discussion in every forum and league. Some prioritized uncovering the archfool and rendering justice. As the true cause of the breaking was unknown, so too was the archfool, but it was believed that the archfool must have some insight into the wheel. Interestingly, both the Mendozanists, mages who wanted to promote extreme experimentation and were, for that reason, the main suspects in the search for the archfool, and their opponents, the conservative League of Continuance, were both in agreement with this alignment. Though the Tenoveshites formed another major part of this alignment, it was the Ivan Firebrand Guz Immaculos of the League of Continuance who became its speaker. A second alignment prioritized finding and sealing any planar rifts. The speaker of this alignment was Jun Wang, who had much of the Qlipothist alignment in agreement, as well as the Astralists and the Encyclopists. The self-named Honorable Guild of Soul Traders often voiced support for sealing the rifts, but for a variety of reasons, some of which I will explain, they never gave much to the effort. Possibly the largest, and certainly the most thoroughly documented, alignment was of those who felt that waging war against infernal forces was more important than any other concerns. Ocean Valentinon, though previously promoting the balance between infernals, became the war party's speaker, and therefore they were often also known as Oceanists. The adherents of Gurnag and Queen Ursula were also staunchly for war. Yorl Chainduyocht nominally associated with the Oceanists as well. Yorl was an elf who led a small group of Qlipoth researchers that were more traditional than the Junwangists, and it was this fact, the general indifference to demons, Zlezdins, and Titans in favor of focusing on the Qlipoth, which made them inadequate allies. These new tendencies took shape in an atmosphere of fear and paranoia. Forum sessions regularly devolved into shouting matches and accusations. 100 changing rumors accused dozens of different archons of being the archfool or of knowing who they were. Duels broke out in halls, even between friends of the same forum. In secret, mages were dragged before tribunals of hooded inquisitors and summarily judged, being ripped out of reality or otherwise made to perish utterly. Leagues traveled in numbers and fought pitched battles through libraries and dormitories alike. Archons affiliated with the Honorable Guild or the Academy of Mendozan's Expanse, that is to say, the Soul Traders and the Reckless Experimenters, came under public persecution and denunciation. Their numbers rapidly depleted as many simply disappeared and many others fled the Sympaticon. They were even assassinated in mid-conversation. Some in the SYMPATIC moved to establish a more formal and open way of trying suspects as a way of curtailing the violence, but most rejected this as completely antithetical to the SYMPATIC's principles. And it's only now that I can come to the CALIAN Orrium itself. So what is this Orrium? We know better now than we did in the dying days of the SYMPATIC. The CALIAN Orrium is so called because it was made in Nyan Kali, a garden on the plain of Edenia. Its maker remains unknown. In those early days, the artifact was also known as a stone orrery. The Fae Court of Nyan Kali used the Orrium to observe the various planes and dominions of the multiverse, basically a curio for conversation. To see it, the Orrium is a stone sphere about the size of a person's head, and it is smooth to the touch, though magnified sight will show its surface to be covered with fine and ornate carving and infinitely compact detail. It isn't known precisely how the Orrium was used in observing planes, but we do know of other significant abilities that it possesses. We also know its current wielder and its whereabouts, but I will come to that later. The Orrium came to the attention of the SYMPATIC due to an unheralded Archon who is known now as Exemplarios Ixza. At the time of the War on the Rainbow Road, Ixza was a friend of the minor Agan Forum, a distinction he gained from close associations with the Soul Traders and the Armsmiths Guild. He was known, by those who knew him, as a collector and trader of artifacts, and, in particular, of null spheres. It was all this, strangely enough, which equipped him to solve the problem of planar instability. The fruits of 5 years' worth of experiments by Exemplarios Ixza were first displayed in a lecture he delivered to the Agan Forum. He demonstrated that null spheres could be used, with sufficiently artful rituals, to prevent planar rifts from forming. Unlike usual spell methods of counteracting rifts, which worked by thickening the skin of reality, so to speak, so that it's harder for a rift to tear through, null spheres would counter rifts by creating a local focus of reality, making that point the least likely point of reality to tear. Exemplarios Ixza noted that null spheres were not strong enough to support the huge effort it would take to stabilize even a demiplane, but he suggested that a magic twisting artifact he'd only ever heard of, called the Airing Sphere, might be useful as an advanced null sphere if it could be found. Shortly, the dragon luminary Shormanal invited Ixza to present before the prestigious Bwenli Forum. Immediately after these presentations, Archons raced to locate the sphere and to develop the ritual means to use it. Ixza, not being an especially talented mage in relation to other Archons, was soon swallowed into the ranks of the Zunwang alignment, while others led the searches, often competing with other seekers. Though the Oceanists and the Goozists did still continue pushing their priorities, the tangibility of the sphere made it the most urgent objective in the eyes of most Archons. Between them, Queen Empress Ursula and her strong ally MERIA CLOUDINGDAWN eventually realized that the Airing Sphere must be the same as the CALIAN Orrium. Ursula knew that the Orrium had come into the possession of the one called Queen Slumber, who had used it to build her Pearl Citadel on the sunken plain of Lemuria. It was not known what happened to it next. When the court of Nyan Kali came to retrieve the Orrium many eons ago, they found the queen in an age sleep and her citadel stoutly trapped against intruders. The SYMPATIC's expedition to recover the Orrium was formed under Ursula's auspices and was led by Juri Vileventa. She and her team of 4 were eventually able to locate the Pearl Citadel, but immediately one of them perished in crossing the threshold. A sliver of no space, set by the inhabitants, awaited any interlopers. The Archons who remained entered the Citadel carefully. Before long, they realized that the Citadel had already been well looted. In Juri's letters, she wrote that despite the many and devious traps, with wretched viscera remaining on spikes, the scene appeared as if intrusion was welcome. Though they did not find the Orrium, the evidence they reported suggested that the items looted from the Citadel had been stolen for their value, which meant that they, and the Orrium, would have been traded. This turned all attention to the greatest center for trading in the multiverse, the dizzying city plain of Shambhala. Vague descriptions of the Orrium led the various SYMPATIC searchers to an eminently wealthy genie named Rasharan the Tremendous. Rasharan had in his possession an artifact called the Kali Orb, which both Exemplarios Ixza and Queen Empress Ursula agreed had to be the Kalian Orrium. Once this was known to the SYMPATIC, nearly every influential group of Archons visited Rasharan to try and buy the Orrium. Ocean Valentinon led a delegation of the War Alignment. Zunwang came with an embassy, as did Tenovesh Newtaste. Jaiwa the Perceptive represented the Guild of Soul Traders, and even Yorel Hyanduyakt, spiting both Ocean and Zunwang, made a personal bid. None were able to convince the genie to part with the Orrium. It was soon known throughout Shambhala how Rasharan had lorded over the Archons of the Sympatic. Wagers were laid under many canopies about exactly what Rasharan would extract from the great mages. At this time in the Sympaticon, the Armsmiths began working with the Astralists, the Order of Resonance, and Junwong. Despite still lacking anything which had not yet been offered to Rasharan, the Armsmiths insisted a new envoy be sent with one of their own as its leader. Begrudgingly, it was agreed that this mission would represent all participating groups, and it was also agreed that the mission's leader would be the senior Archon of the Armsmiths, EMMODEC IRONBENDER. EMMODEC was a dwarf from the world of Thos who earned Archonhood through his elegant multiplicative rune cartouching. Like many Archons, he largely abandoned magical theory for the practical goals of amassing comfort and power. EMMODEC joined the scrupulous guild of Armsmiths early. By this time, he had lasted long enough to inherit the distinction of being the most senior Armsmith Archon, a position of great influence in both the Armsmiths and in the Sympatic. Despite the distinction, it was this allegiance with the so-called crass commercialism of the Armsmiths which meant that he was never invited to become a friend of any forum. EMMODEC was well known by his peers for being gruff and for favoring any deal that would put someone powerful in his debt. Now, I said all that because it's natural for historical figures, such as EMMODEC IRONBENDER, to have their details relayed so that you can say that you know who they are. None of this, however, is what motivated EMMODEC to demand this meeting with Rasharan. What motivated him was the word of Simony the Bright-Eyed, an angel who associated with the Armsmiths but was not an Archon herself. She told him that her master and progenitor, the King in Gold, required the Orrium for the good of the multiverse, and EMMODEC took her at her word. I have never spoken to a deity or the emissary of a deity. I have heard it is a terrifying and transcendent experience. It's possible that Simony overawed EMMODEC with her presence, or that she simply convinced him with impenetrable reason. That I don't know. What is important is that EMMODEC did her bidding to the full. The embassy was only one part of EMMODEC's plan. The other involved an acquaintance he knew from when the Armsmiths had dealt the Rod of Erasure to the slavering host of Pazuzu. This acquaintance was called Drenless, and she served as the whisperer to the Demon Prince. As a succubus with thousands of years' experience, Drenless was an exceptional choice for the role EMMODEC picked her for. While EMMODEC labored to establish the Sympatic's embassy to Rasharan, Drenless maneuvered an invitation to dine with the Great Genie. Drenless's particular passion was dinner conversation, and it was said that the two dined together alone for 6 turnings of the Shambhala sky. EMMODEC and 7 other Archons eventually arrived to Rasharan's palace. They met him there but did not meet Drenless. In point of fact, Drenless's participation would not be known for centuries. At first, Rasharan rebuffed these Archons as he had the others, but soon EMMODEC's patience seemed to wear out. EMMODEC rose to his feet and thundered against the cosmic selfishness of Rasharan. He demanded that Rasharan recognize the encroaching dissolution of all reality, and insisted that he use his wealth and possessions to help solve it, as the Sympatic and EMMODEC himself were doing. All these things had been said before, and as forcefully, but it was only now that Rasharan seemed affected. After enduring the dwarf's fury, Rasharan only asked for a guarantee that he would not lose face by the gift which the Sympatic gave in return. EMMODEC and the others agreed. By magic, Rasharan carried the Kali orb from his collection and over to the embassy, and as soon as it touched EMMODEC's hands, both the dwarf and the orb vanished. The entire multiverse changed foundationally in an instant, but most would only learn of it slowly. The Sympatic, though, would be the first to get an account. Every single Angel Archon, which was hundreds, had been suddenly summoned to attend the King in Gold, the same instant that EMMODEC had vanished. Ocean Valentinon herself, the half-exiled angel, was the one to inform the Sympatic of what had happened when she addressed the Bwenley Forum following her return from the plane of the DUAT. Ocean, she said, and the other angels had taken part in a mass ritual conducted by the Archsphinx Balamata the Grateful. Their purpose was to manipulate the CALIAN Orrium. This ritual, which was successful, made the CALIAN Orrium, and, by extension, the DUAT as a whole, a new center of concentration for all reality, almost completely proofing that plane against planar rifts. The consequence of this was that planes far away from the DUAT became much more susceptible to such rifts, which now might be even greater than before. These endangered planes include the mortal plane, the lower planes, and the entire astral void, which also meant that the Sympaticon itself was now further at risk. Ocean also related that she had felt the presences of EMMODEC and Rasharan on the DUAT, deified now as Umenhotep and Rahran. This was due, according to Ocean, to the insistence by Simony the Bright-Eyed that the two of them had needed the King in Gold's protection. In effect, this entire Orrium Mystery had stolen both the Sympatic's chance to stabilize a greater part of the multiverse, as well as any justice for that first theft. This news shattered the Sympatic. There were some who accepted these events, having believed and argued that the King in Gold was the supreme multiversal protector, and therefore that the DUAT was the ultimate refuge. But this duatist alignment was immediately outnumbered by two others: the loud and strident consolidationists, who agitated for a strong, formal Sympatic to prevent further betrayals, and the fractious, disaffected ungrouped, who would do anything to avoid cooperating with a centralizing influence. From this point, the Sympatic was beyond saving. Its total dissolution, up to when the Moth Monks warded the halls of the Sympaticon against entropy, would take several centuries. This, however, was their end as the high society of interplanar magic. I could tell you of the fiasco that was their registration of artifacts or their scuffles with the Vigilant Watch, but those are better told as part of their own stories. I've told you the history of the Orrium Mystery, in brief treatment at least, and telling more of it here would muddle this picture. We know what we know now about those times not just from documentation and letters. Maybe 300 years ago, the mystery was spoken of by Umenhotep, the semi-deity who was once called EMMODEC Ironbender. As a deific being, Umenhotep has been unassailable by mortals and even incarnates, so that he has had no threat even from those who still wish for him to be dealt with. He gave his account of what happened to the bard Lurian Dulcivos, who, in her gall, had simply asked him. So what I've told you here is most of what she was told. We at SCHOLOMANCE are, of course, very interested in our parent institution, so I doubt you will find a fuller explanation of the mystery anywhere except from another friend of this university. I trust that what I have told you is more than what you need. If you can help it, do not keep this letter. You shouldn't involve yourself with the affairs of the planes. But, should you need another question answered, I will, of course, await your gift.